I'm Odessa 32, and never imagined I'd be standing in my mansion's foyer facing parents who erased me from their lives for 8 years. The shock on their faces as they took in my success was almost worth the pain of watching family reunions through social media posts year after year. Their sudden appearance after I made Forbes 30 under 40 wasn't coincidence. Now they wanted me back in their lives, but only because of what I owned, not who I was. If you're watching this, I'd love to know where you're viewing from. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. Let me know in the comments if you've ever had to confront someone who only valued you after you became successful. Trust me, you're not alone. I grew up in a modest middle-class neighborhood in Boston, the only child of Harold and Margaret Wilson. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family. Dad was a bank manager at the prestigious Boston First National. Mom served on the local school board, and I was their supposedly cherished daughter. But inside our immaculately maintained colonial home with its pristine white picket fence, things were far from perfect. My parents were obsessed with status and appearances. Every decision, from the car they drove to the clothes they wore, was calculated to impress others and maintain their carefully curated image. Perception is reality, Odessa, my father would often say, straightening his tie before heading to another neighborhood function. It doesn't matter who you really are. It only matters who people think you are. Their love for me was similarly conditional, a transaction rather than a gift. I received praise when I met their impossibly high expectations, and cold disappointment when I fell short. There was no middle ground, no acceptance of normal human imperfection. I was 12 when I brought home my report card with straight A's and 1 B+ in chemistry. Most parents would have been thrilled, but not mine. The memory is still vivid after all these years. Walking into our kitchen, report card clutched in my sweaty hand, a mix of pride and anxiety churning in my stomach. "What's this?" My mother's perfectly plucked eyebrows arched as she spotted the offending grade. She was sitting at our Granite Island counter, planning another school board fundraiser, her reading glasses perched precisely on her nose. "A B+ Odessa. The Wilsons don't get B+s." My father looked up from his Wall Street Journal, disappointment etched into the lines around his mouth. "The Prescott's daughter got all A's this semester, and she's taking advanced classes." "I studied really hard, Dad," I remember saying, my voice small. "Chemistry is difficult, and I improved from last quarter." "Improvement isn't achievement," my mother replied coldly. "What will people think when they hear Harold Wilson's daughter is just average? Just average." Those words echoed in my head for years. In my parents' world, being average was the ultimate failure. There was no celebration of effort, no acknowledgement of progress. Only results mattered, and only perfect results at that. My early passion for computers and coding was met with similar dismissal. I discovered programming in 7th grade when our school got a new computer lab. While other kids played games, I found myself fascinated by how the programs worked. I began staying after school to learn basic coding from our IT teacher, Mr. Reynolds, who recognized something in me that my parents never did: genuine curiosity and aptitude. "Computers are a nice hobby, dear," my mother said when I excitedly showed her my first simple program, a calculator I had coded myself. "But let's focus on your debate team. The college admissions boards will care much more about that." "The tech industry is unstable," my father added. "Law, medicine, finance. These are respectable career paths for a Wilson." Despite their lack of interest, I continued coding in secret. It became my refuge, the one place where I could be myself without judgment. In the logical world of programming, there were still right and wrong answers. But mistakes were just problems to solve, not character flaws to hide. Throughout high school, my achievements became weapons in my parents' social arsenal. When I won the state mathematics competition, they hosted an elaborate dinner party, not to celebrate my accomplishment, but to ensure everyone in their social circle knew about it. I'll never forget overhearing them at one such gathering. I had come downstairs for a glass of water, pausing outside the dining room, when I heard my name. "Odessa is absolutely brilliant with numbers," my mother was saying to the wife of my father's boss. "Harvard is already showing interest. We always knew she had exceptional potential." "We've invested heavily in her education," my father added proudly. "The best tutors, the most exclusive summer programs. It's what responsible parents do. Later that same night, when all the guests had gone, I heard them in the kitchen. "Did you see how impressed Robert was?" my mother asked. "His daughter only made it to the regional finals. This will certainly help when Harold's up for that promotion." "Odessa needs to work on her public speaking, though," my father replied. "She was too quiet tonight. The miller's son has such presence already." They spoke about me as if I were a stock in their portfolio, valuable only for the social return I could provide. My accomplishments weren't mine. They belonged to the family brand, the Wilson family brand. It was suffocating living under the weight of their expectations and conditional approval. Each achievement brought only momentary warmth before the pressure to perform began again. I learned early that I wasn't loved for who I was, but for what I could do to enhance my parents' status. This toxic foundation would eventually crack completely, but at the time, I was still desperately trying to earn the love that should have been freely given. When my MIT acceptance letter arrived, I was ecstatic. Computer science at one of the world's most prestigious technical institutes, it was my dream come true. I'd worked tirelessly for this opportunity, taking advanced courses, participating in coding competitions, building projects on my own time. This wasn't for my parents. This was for me, a future I had chosen. I can still picture myself standing in our kitchen, clutching the acceptance letter, my hands trembling with excitement as I waited for my parents to come home. When they finally arrived, I proudly presented the envelope. "Massachusetts Institute of Technology." My mother's voice was flat as she read the letter. "I thought we discussed Harvard Law." "But Mom, this is MIT for computer science. It's one of the best programs in the world." I explained, my enthusiasm already deflating under her cool gaze. "Computers?" My father sighed, loosening his tie. "Odessa lawyers become judges, senators, community leaders. What will you become with computers? An IT support person. Software engineers can change the world," I argued. "They're building the future." "The Henderson's daughter got into Yale Law," my mother remarked, placing the acceptance letter on the counter, as if it were a disappointing grocery receipt. "Perhaps you could still apply there for the spring semester." That evening set the tone for my entire college experience. My parents contributed financially to my education, something they never let me forget, but their emotional support was non-existent. My choice was a disappointment to them, a deviation from the plan they had laid out for the perfect Wilson daughter. Moving into my dorm at MIT was the first taste of freedom I'd ever experienced. My roommate Zoe Chen was everything I wasn't. Confident, outspoken, unapologetically herself. With wildly curly hair she never tried to tame, and a wardrobe full of vibrant colors, she was my opposite in many ways. Yet we connected instantly. "Your parents didn't help you move in?" she asked as she watched me struggling alone with my suitcases. "They had a charity gala." I explained, the excuse sounding hollow even to my own ears. "Their loss," Zoe shrugged, grabbing one of my bags. "My parents tried to stay, but I kicked them out. Too many tearful goodbyes make me break out in hives." Zoe became not just my roommate, but my first real friend. She saw me, really saw me, not as an extension of my parents or a grade point average, but as a person with dreams and fears and quirks. We stayed up late talking about everything from quantum computing to our favorite ice cream flavors. She taught me that friendship shouldn't be transactional, that connections could be built on genuine affection rather than mutual benefit. The first holiday break of freshman year brought the initial clear sign of my parents' shifting attitude. Thanksgiving had always been a big production in the Wilson household, a chance for my mother to showcase her hosting skills and for my father to network with carefully selected guests. I naturally assumed I'd be going home as all my friends were returning to their families. 2 weeks before the break, I called home to confirm my travel plans. "Oh, Odessa," my mother said, her voice distracted. "We assumed you'd be staying on campus this year." "Staying here? But it's Thanksgiving," I replied, confused. "Well, your father and I have decided to try something different this year. We're going to the Maldives with the Robertsons. Their son Thomas is home from Princeton, and apparently he's bringing some fascinating friends. Networking opportunities, you understand. So you're not even having Thanksgiving at home?" I asked, the reality dawning on me. The resort has a lovely American-themed dinner planned, she replied. I'm sure the university has something for students who stay behind. They hadn't forgotten to include me. They had chosen not to. When I hung up the phone, Zoe found me staring blankly at the wall. Family drama, she asked, plopping down beside me on my bed. My parents went on vacation instead of sending me a plane ticket home. I explained, still processing what had happened. Zoe didn't offer empty platitudes or forced optimism. Instead, she squeezed my hand and said, well, then you're coming home with me. My mom makes enough food to feed a small country, and my dad tells terrible dad jokes that are so bad they're actually good. That Thanksgiving with Zoe's family showed me what family gatherings could be. Warm, sometimes chaotic, filled with genuine laughter and affection that didn't depend on achievements or appearances. The pattern of exclusion only grew more pronounced as my college years progressed. Calls from my parents became scarce, and when they did call, they spoke mostly about themselves and their social engagements. Invitations home for breaks and holidays dwindled until they stopped altogether. Meanwhile, I threw myself into my studies and coding projects. If I couldn't earn my parents' approval, I would at least excel in something I loved. Zoe and I began dreaming up ideas for apps and programs, staying up all night in the computer lab, fueled by vending machine snacks and ambition. During junior year, I had my first real breakthrough. For a class project, I developed a prototype for a privacy-focused social media platform that gave users complete control over their data. My professor was impressed enough to suggest I consider developing it further after graduation. When graduation day finally arrived, I scanned the crowd for my parents, finally spotting them in the back row. They had arrived late, missed my departmental honor ceremony completely, and were checking their watches throughout the commencement address. Congratulations, my father said afterward, his handshake formal. We have a dinner reservation at 7, but we'll need to leave by 8:30. Your mother has an early flight to Chicago for a charity board meeting. I was hoping we could celebrate a little longer, I said, still wearing my cap and gown. Maybe invite Zoe and her parents. They've been so kind to me. This dinner is just family Odessa, my mother replied with a tight smile, and we really must keep to the schedule. The dinner was brief and uncomfortable, filled with superficial questions they didn't really want answers to. They barely acknowledged that I had graduated summa cum laude, or that I had already received job offers from several major tech companies. Technology is having quite a moment, my father remarked dismissively. Though I wonder about its staying power. The law has been stable for centuries. They left early as planned, citing my mother's early flight. I sat alone at the table picking at my dessert, watching other families laughing and celebrating together. That was the moment I fully understood that in my parents' eyes, I would never be enough. Not because of any failure on my part, but because their love had always been conditional on me, fitting into their narrow definition of success. The final breaking point came 1 year after graduation. Zoe and I had taken a massive risk, turning down lucrative job offers to launch our own startup based on my privacy-focused social media concept. We called it True Connect, a platform where users truly owned their data and could control exactly who saw what. We were living in a tiny apartment in Cambridge, surviving on ramen noodles and coffee, coding day and night to build our dream. The apartment was so small that we used our suitcases as additional drawer space and took turns using the desk we'd found on a street corner. But despite the cramped quarters and financial stress, I felt more alive than I ever had in my parents' perfectly appointed house. It was a random Tuesday when I was scrolling through Instagram during a rare break and saw it. Photos from a family reunion at my grandparents' lake house in Maine. There was my extended family. Aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't seen in years, all smiling in the summer sunshine. My parents were front and center in several photos, my father at the grill, my mother arranging flowers on the picnic table. I stared at the images, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. I hadn't been invited. I hadn't even known the reunion was happening. With shaking hands, I called my mother. Hello? Her voice was cheerful, relaxed, a tone I rarely heard directed at me. Mom, I just saw the photos from the family reunion, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Was my invitation lost in the mail or something? There was a pause, then a soft sigh. Odessa. It was just for immediate family. I am immediate family, I replied, confusion mixing with hurt. I'm your daughter. Immediate family who've made something of themselves, she clarified, her voice cooling. Your father and I didn't think you'd fit in with your situation, living in that tiny apartment working on some internet project rather than a real career. What would we have told everyone? The truth hit me like a physical blow. I wasn't invited because I was an embarrassment to them. My startup, which I was pouring my heart and soul into, was just some internet project. My choices didn't align with the Wilson family image, so I was erased. I managed to say, my throat tight. When you've established yourself properly, there will be plenty of family gatherings, my mother added, as if offering a generous compromise. The Prescott's daughter just made junior partner at her law firm. She's younger than you know. After hanging up, I sat motionless for nearly an hour, letting the full weight of my parents' rejection sink in. Zoe found me like that when she returned with our takeout dinner. What happened? She asked, immediately dropping the food and sitting beside me. Through tears, I explained about the family reunion and my mother's cruel words. They're ashamed of me, I concluded, of my choices, of who I am. Zoe's expression hardened. Then they don't deserve you, she said firmly. Family isn't about status or career choices. It's about love, unconditional love. In the following months, I watched from afar as more family events unfolded without me. Another reunion at a beach house in Florida, a Christmas gathering at my aunt's home, a ski trip to Colorado. Each time the photos appeared on social media, each one a fresh cut to an unhealed wound. The third exclusion was the hardest to bear. My grandfather's 75th birthday celebration. He and I had been close when I was young. He was the one who bought me my first computer, who listened with genuine interest to my ideas. But even that connection wasn't enough to secure me an invitation. When I called him to wish him a happy birthday, his voice was strained. "Thank you for calling, Odessa," he said quietly. "I miss you." "I miss you too, Grandpa," I replied. "How was the party?" There was a pause. "Your parents said you were too busy with work to attend." Another lie, another erasure. The final conversation with my parents came after that third exclusion. My father called his tone businesslike. "Your mother and I have been discussing your situation," he began without preamble. "We think it might be time for you to consider a more stable career path. The Johnston's son works at a financial technology firm, a compromise between your interests and practical reality. He might be able to help you get an interview." "I'm not looking for a new job, Dad," I replied. "True, Connect is starting to gain traction. We just secured our first small investor." "Odessa," he sighed. "This fantasy of becoming the next Mark Zuckerberg needs to end. You're not a college student anymore. It's time to join the real world, build some stability, become someone the family can be proud of." "Someone the family can be proud of." I repeated, the words burning in my throat. "That's all that matters to you, isn't it? How I make you look to others." "Don't be dramatic," he dismissed. "We want what's best for you." "No," I said, a new firmness in my voice. "You want what's best for your image. There's a difference." "This attitude is precisely why you're struggling," he replied coldly. "The Wilson name means something in Boston. Your mother and I have worked hard to build our reputation. If you can't contribute positively to that legacy, perhaps it's better if you don't participate in family functions until you can." It was the clearest articulation of what I'd already known. My place in the family was conditional on fitting their mold. Love in the Wilson household came with terms and conditions. That night, I made a decision. I changed my phone number, moved to a different apartment without forwarding my mail, and cut all direct contact. I maintained connections with a few sympathetic cousins who disagreed with my parents' treatment of me, but otherwise I extricated myself from the Wilson family web. If I couldn't be accepted as I was, I would build a life where I didn't need their acceptance at all. The years following that final conversation were the hardest and most rewarding of my life. Zoe and I worked relentlessly on True Connect, refining the platform, pitching to investors, building our user base person by person. Our tiny apartment became command central for our two-person company, with whiteboards covering every wall and empty coffee cups creating miniature skylines on every surface. Our first real breakthrough came 9 months after cutting ties with my family. After dozens of rejections, we finally secured our first significant investment, $500,000 from a venture capitalist who believed in our vision of privacy-first social media. He actually gets it, Zoe marveled as we celebrated with cheap champagne in plastic cups. He understands why people should own their own data. This is just the beginning, I replied, a newfound confidence in my voice. We're going to change how people think about social media. The investment allowed us to hire our first employees, a back-end developer named Marcus and a UX designer named Lily. We moved into a small office space, nothing fancy, but a significant upgrade from our apartment. For the first time, TrueConnect felt like a real company rather than just an ambitious dream. The launch was terrifying and exhilarating. We worked around the clock in the weeks leading up to it, fixing bugs, refining features, preparing marketing materials. When we finally went live, we held our breath, watching the user numbers trickle in slowly. The first week was nerve-wracking. User adoption was steady but not spectacular. Some tech blogs gave us positive reviews, while others questioned whether there was really a market for a privacy-focused platform when people seemed content to give away their data to larger networks. Maybe we were wrong. I confessed to Zoe late one night, both of us still at the office staring at our metrics dashboard. Maybe people don't care enough about privacy. People don't know what they're missing until they experience it, Zoe replied, her faith unshaken. We just need one big moment to show them. That moment came in the most unexpected way. A popular actress with millions of followers had her personal photos leaked by a mainstream social network. The privacy violation made national news, and in an interview, she mentioned that she was switching to this new platform called TrueConnect, where I actually control who sees what. Overnight, our user numbers exploded. What had been a steady trickle became a flood, as people concerned about their own digital privacy flocked to our platform. We scrambled to scale our servers, working through the night to ensure the system could handle the sudden influx. We're trending on Twitter, Marcus announced, bursting into the office one morning, his eyes wide with excitement. True, Connect is the #1 tech topic right now. Within months, we had grown from a few thousand users to over 1 million. Tech publications that had once dismissed us were now requesting interviews, calling TrueConnect the future of social networking, and me a visionary in digital privacy. As the company grew, so did our team. We moved to a larger office, hired more developers, built out marketing and customer service departments. What had started as two friends coding in a tiny apartment was now a legitimate tech company with 50 employees. Through it all, Zoe remained my rock, my co-founder, my best friend. We complemented each other perfectly. My technical expertise and her business acumen, my attention to detail and her big picture thinking. When I doubted myself, she believed enough for both of us. The first time we celebrated hitting 1 million users, we threw a party for the whole team. Standing in our office, watching our employees laughing and celebrating together, I felt a sense of belonging I'd never experienced in my parents' house. We did it, Zoe said, appearing beside me with 2 glasses of actual champagne, no plastic cups this time. We really did it. We're just getting started, I replied, but I took a moment to savor the victory nonetheless. As TrueConnect continued to grow, so did the acquisition offers. Tech giants, seeing our rising user base and unique approach to privacy, began circling with increasingly large numbers. The biggest offer came 3 years after our launch, a staggering $800 million from the very company whose privacy breach had catapulted us to success. That's life-changing money, Marcus pointed out during the leadership meeting where we discussed the offer. We'd all be set for life. But we'd lose control of the platform, Lily countered. They'd dismantle our privacy features within a year. Everything we've built would disappear. The decision wasn't easy, but in the end it was clear. We declined the offer, choosing independence over a massive payday. 6 months later, we took TrueConnect public with a record-breaking IPO for a company of our size. I still remember standing on the stock exchange floor, watching our company symbol appear on the big board for the first time. Zoe squeezed my hand so hard, it almost hurt both of us, trying not to cry as the opening bell rang. By the end of that day, my net worth had climbed to over $300 million. The girl whose parents had deemed her an embarrassment for pursuing her passion was now one of the youngest female tech CEOs of a publicly traded company. With financial security beyond anything I'd imagined, I finally purchased my dream home, a restored historic mansion overlooking the Boston skyline. The irony wasn't lost on me that I now lived less than 20 miles from my parents, in a home far grander than theirs, built on the very career path they had dismissed as a hobby. The mansion wasn't about showing off wealth. It was about creating the home I'd always wanted, warm, welcoming, filled with books and art and technology. I designed a state-of-the-art home office where I could work when not at TrueConnect headquarters, and dedicated one wing to a nonprofit coding school for underprivileged youth. Through all this success, my parents remained silent. I occasionally heard updates about them through cousins, how they still hosted their carefully curated dinner parties, still served on the same boards, still moved in the same social circles. But not once did they reach out to reconnect with their now successful daughter. Until the Forbes article. When the magazine named me to their 30 under 40 list, featuring a 6-page spread on TrueConnect's revolutionary approach to social media and my journey as a founder, something finally shifted. The article mentioned my estrangement from my family in one brief paragraph, noting that I had built success without the support network many entrepreneurs rely on. 1 week after the magazine hit newsstands, my parents appeared at my front door. It was a Tuesday afternoon like any other. I was working from home reviewing design mock-ups for TrueConnect's new interface in my sunlit office when my security guard called. "Ms. Wilson, there are 2 people at the gate claiming to be your parents," he said, a note of uncertainty in his voice. "Harold and Margaret Wilson. Should I turn them away?" My heart seemed to stop, then restart at double speed. 8 years. It had been 8 years since I'd seen them, spoken to them, been acknowledged by them. "Ms. Wilson," the guard prompted when I didn't immediately respond. I'll come down," I managed to say, my mouth suddenly dry. "Let them through to the main entrance, but wait with them until I arrive." I stood from my desk on unsteady legs, catching a glimpse of myself in the wall mirror. Successful CEO in tailored slacks and a silk blouse, so different from the insecure young woman desperate for parental approval. Taking a deep breath, I smoothed my hair and made my way through the winding corridors of my home. The walk from my office to the front entrance felt endless. My mind raced with questions. Why now? What did they want? Had they seen the Forbes article? Of course they had. The timing couldn't be coincidence. 8 years of silence. And they appeared just after my most public recognition yet. I paused at the top of the grand staircase, looking down at the foyer where they stood. My father's hair had turned completely gray, and he seemed smaller somehow, less imposing than in my memories. My mother remained impeccably dressed in a designer suit, her blonde hair now styled in a shorter cut, streaks of silver visible despite careful coloring. They didn't notice me at first, too busy taking in the soaring ceilings, the crystal chandelier, the original artwork on the walls. I saw my mother nudge my father, pointing discreetly at a painting, likely recognizing it as the work of a renowned Boston artist. "Hello," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the marble foyer as I descended the stairs. They turned simultaneously, identical expressions of shock flickering across their faces, before being replaced with practiced smiles. "Odessa," my mother breathed, stepping forward with arms outstretched, as if we'd seen each other last week rather than 8 years ago. "You look wonderful." I remained just beyond her reach, not stepping into the offered embrace. "This is unexpected," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "What brings you here after all this time?" My father cleared his throat. "We were in the neighborhood and thought we'd stop by, see how you're doing." The absurdity of the statement, no one was in the neighborhood of my secluded estate, hung in the air between us. "That's thoughtful," I replied, not bothering to hide my skepticism. "Would you like to come in for tea, or do you have another engagement to rush off to?" The subtle reference to our last meeting, the hurried graduation dinner, wasn't lost on them. My mother's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Tea would be lovely," she said smoothly. "What a beautiful home you have. The architecture is simply stunning." I led them to the east sitting room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. A staff member appeared almost instantly with a tea service, a detail that clearly impressed my status-conscious parents. "Your home is quite impressive," my father commented, accepting a cup of tea. "You must be doing well with that internet company of yours." "True," Connect. I supplied the name they had never bothered to learn. Yes, we're doing very well. We have over 20 million active users now and offices in Boston, San Francisco, and London. We always knew you had potential, my mother said, as if she had been my biggest supporter all along. Such a smart girl, even as a child. The ease with which they rewrote history was breathtaking. No acknowledgement of the years of silence, the missed holidays, the explicit exclusion from family events. No mention of their disapproval of my career choice, or their shame at my early struggles. Did you see the Forbes article? I asked directly, watching their reactions carefully. We did? My father nodded, attempting to look proud. Featured prominently in the doctor's office when your mother was there last week. Everyone was quite impressed when we mentioned you were our daughter. There it was, the true reason for their visit. Not concern for me, not a desire to repair our relationship, but the social capital my success now offered them. I was finally someone they could brag about at dinner parties. How nice, I said, taking a sip of tea to hide the bitterness I felt rising in my throat. The conversation continued in this vein for nearly 30 minutes. Superficial pleasantries, careful avoidance of the 8-year gap in our relationship, transparent attempts to associate themselves with my success. They asked no meaningful questions about my life, my happiness, my struggles along the way. Instead, they focused on the visible trappings of wealth, the house, the art, the implied status. Finally, my father set down his teacup and leaned forward slightly, a sign he was moving to the real purpose of their visit. Odessa, we're hosting the annual family reunion next month at our summer home on the Cape, he announced. The whole family will be there. Your cousins, aunts, uncles, everyone. We'd very much like you to attend. Would you? I asked, raising an eyebrow. After 8 years of not inviting me to a single family gathering, my mother had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable. That was a misunderstanding. Was it? I pressed. Because I distinctly remember being told that family reunions were for immediate family who've made something of themselves, that I wouldn't fit in with the family image because of my career choices and lifestyle. You're taking that completely out of context, my father protested. We were concerned about you living in that tiny apartment pursuing such an uncertain path. We didn't want you to feel uncomfortable around more established family members. How considerate, I replied, unable to keep the edge from my voice. Well, things are different now, my mother interjected brightly. You've established yourself quite impressively. Everyone saw the Forbes article. The family will be so pleased to reconnect with you. Now that I'm successful enough not to embarrass you, I clarified, watching them squirm. Now that you'll fit in, my mother corrected, seemingly oblivious to how damning the statement was. Your cousin Jennifer is very impressed by your company. Her husband works in venture capital, you know. He says True Connect is considered quite the success story. The realization crystallized with perfect clarity. Nothing had changed. My worth to them was still entirely conditional. The only difference was that I now met their conditions. Not because of who I was as a person, but because of what I had accomplished, what I owned, how I could enhance their social standing. I see, I said quietly. So now that I have a mansion and millions in the bank, I'm family again. Don't be dramatic, Odessa. My father sighed, the familiar dismissal sending me straight back to childhood. Family is family. We've always considered you family. That was the moment something broke inside me. Or perhaps something finally healed. The desperate need for their approval that had driven me for so long. The hurt that had festered for years, the anger I had carried. It all shifted into something else entirely: clarity. Family is family, I repeated slowly. That's an interesting perspective from people who excluded their only daughter from every family gathering for 8 years, who never called to check if I was okay, who didn't bother to find out if I was successful or homeless. My parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. The past is the past, my mother said dismissively. We're here now. We're reaching out. Isn't that what matters? Why are you reaching out now? I asked, though I already knew the answer. What changed? The silence that followed was answer enough. I'd like to show you something, I said, standing abruptly. Please follow me. I led my parents through my home, past the living spaces they had already admired beyond the kitchen, where staff were preparing dinner down a hallway lined with photographs. These weren't the formal portraits that had adorned my parents' walls, carefully posed, perfectly lit images of a family that existed only for show. These were candid shots of real moments with people who truly cared about me. This is from True Connect's IPO day, I explained, pausing at a photo of Zoe and me on the stock exchange floor, arms around each other, tears of joy in our eyes. One of the most important days of my life. We continued walking, passing more images, holiday celebrations with Zoe's family, who had welcomed me as their own team retreats with True Connect employees, volunteer days at the coding school I'd founded. And this, I said, stopping at a large group photo, is my chosen family. The people who supported me when I had nothing but an idea and determination. The people who believed in me when you couldn't be bothered to. My mother's eyes narrowed slightly at the phrase, chosen family, but she quickly masked it with another practiced smile. How nice that you had colleagues during that time. Not colleagues, I corrected firmly. Family. People who love me unconditionally, not just when I'm successful enough to reflect well on them. I continued the tour, finally leading them to my home office. One wall was dedicated to True Connect's journey, framed newspaper articles about our launch, our first million users, our stand against selling user data, our IPO. Another showcased the coding school's success stories, students who had gone from disadvantaged backgrounds to careers in tech. This is what you missed, I said quietly. Not just my success, but my struggle. The late nights, the rejections, the moments of doubt, the victories small and large, the person I became while building something I believed in. My parents stood awkwardly in the center of the room, clearly unsure how to respond. This wasn't following the script they had imagined. Me gratefully accepting their renewed interest, eagerly rejoining the family fold now that I met their standards. "We're proud of you, Odessa," my father finally said. "We always have been." The words might have meant something once. Years ago, they might have been all I wanted to hear. Now they rang hollow. "No," I said, my voice calm but firm. "You're impressed by me. That's different from being proud of me. Being proud would have meant supporting me when I was struggling, celebrating with me when I succeeded, loving me regardless of the outcome." "That's not fair," my mother protested. "We've always wanted what's best for you." "What was best for your image?" I corrected. "There's a difference." I moved to the windows overlooking the grounds, gathering my thoughts before turning back to face them. "I need you to understand something," I said. "I didn't build all this to prove you wrong or to earn your approval. At some point along the way, I stopped caring what you thought. I built this life for me, because I believed in what I was creating, because I found purpose in making something that helps people protect their privacy and connect authentically." My father shifted uncomfortably. Of course, of course. And you've done very well for yourself, which is why we thought now would be a good time to reconnect to bring the family back together. Now that I won't embarrass you," I said pointedly. "Now that we have things in common again," my mother amended smoothly. "Your success, your beautiful home. These are things the family can relate to." Her honesty, however unintentional, was breathtaking. In her mind, we could only connect if I had the right external markers of success. My actual happiness, my character, my values, these were irrelevant compared to having a mansion and a recognizable name. "Let me be very clear," I said, looking directly at both of them. "I'm not interested in a relationship based on what I own or what I've achieved. If you want to be part of my life, it has to be because you value me as a person, not as a success story you can brag about, not as a connection to impress your friends, not as an accessory to your social climbing." My mother's perfectly maintained facade cracked slightly, a flash of genuine emotion. Perhaps surprise, perhaps hurt, crossing her features before she composed herself again. "Of course we value you as a person," she insisted. "You're our daughter." "Am I?" I asked, because for 8 years that didn't seem to matter much to you. "People make mistakes," my father interjected. "We may have been overly concerned with appearances in the past, but we're here now. Isn't that what counts?" "Why are you here now?" I pressed. "Is it because you miss me? Because you realized family is about unconditional love? Or is it because the Forbes article made me someone worth claiming again?" The silence that followed was deafening. "That's what I thought," I said softly. "Let me show you out." As we walked back through the house toward the entrance, my mother made one last attempt. "So you won't be attending the family reunion?" What should I tell everyone? "Tell them the truth," I suggested. "That after 8 years of excluding me when I didn't meet your standards of success, you suddenly wanted me back when I became wealthy and notable. Tell them I'm busy building a life with people who value me for who I am, not what I own." My father's face flushed with anger. "This is absurd. We're your parents. You owe us more respect than this." "Respect is earned," I replied calmly. "And it's a two-way street." We reached the front door, and I turned to face them one last time. "I don't hate you," I said, surprising myself with the realization that it was true. "I'm not even angry anymore. I'm just clear. Clear about who I am, what I deserve, and what kind of relationships I want in my life." "And we're not welcome in your life?" My mother asked, a tremor in her voice that might have been genuine emotion or just another performance. "I didn't say that," I clarified. "I said I'm not interested in a conditional relationship. If you ever want to know me, really know me, not just the successful CEO with the impressive house, I'm open to that. But it would mean acknowledging the harm you cause, taking responsibility for your choices, and building something new based on mutual respect and genuine care." My father looked like he might argue further, but my mother placed a restraining hand on his arm. "We should go," she said quietly. As they walked to their car, a new Mercedes I noticed clearly meant to impress, my mother paused and looked back at the mansion, at me standing in the doorway. "You've done well for yourself," she said, something unreadable in her expression. "Better than we expected." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even real recognition. But it was perhaps the most honest thing she had said all afternoon. "Yes," I agreed simply. "I have." I watched them drive away, feeling lighter with each second as their car disappeared down my long driveway. The encounter had not gone as they planned, but it had given me something unexpected closure. Inside, I picked up my phone and called Zoe. "They finally showed up," I said when she answered. 8 years of silence, and they appeared at my door like nothing had happened. "Let me guess," she replied. "They saw the Forbes article." "Of course. And they wanted to invite you back into the fold now that you're successful enough not to embarrass them." I smiled despite everything. Zoe knew me, knew them, too well. "Exactly. They're hosting the family reunion next month and suddenly remembered they have a daughter." "What did you do?" she asked. "I showed them out," I said simply. "And I realized something important in the process." "What's that?" "I don't need them anymore." I said, the truth of it settling comfortably around me like a favorite sweater. "I haven't for a long time. 6 months have passed since my parents stood in my foyer trying to reclaim a daughter they had discarded years ago. Tonight, my home is filled with warmth and laughter as I host a dinner party for my chosen family. Zoe and her parents, who welcomed me for Thanksgiving all those years ago. Key members of the True Connect team, who have become dear friends. Students from the coding school who inspire me daily with their determination. Neighbors who check in just because they care. The long dining table that once seemed too big for a woman living alone is now perfectly sized for this gathering of people who love each other authentically. The conversation flows easily, punctuated by genuine laughter and thoughtful pauses, so different from the calculated social performances of my childhood home. "A toast," Zoe says, raising her glass. "To Odessa, who opened her home and heart to all of us, creating a family based on love rather than obligation." "To Odessa," they echo, and I feel a warmth that has nothing to do with the excellent wine and everything to do with belonging. Later, as guests mingle over dessert, I step onto the terrace for a moment of quiet reflection. The night is clear, stars visible despite the city lights in the distance. I think about the journey that brought me here, from the little girl desperate for approval to the woman who finally learned her own worth. My parents have reached out twice since their visit. The first contact was a formal invitation to the family reunion, as if our conversation had never happened. I declined politely but firmly. The second was more surprising. A brief email from my mother acknowledging that perhaps they had been somewhat focused on appearances in the past. It wasn't a true apology, not really, but it was a tiny crack in the perfect facade they had maintained for decades. I responded with equal brevity, suggesting that if they wanted to build a relationship based on who we actually are, rather than what we represent, I would be open to small, gradual steps in that direction. I don't know if anything will come of it. I'm not even sure I want something to come of it. But I've learned that forgiveness doesn't require forgetting, and boundaries don't preclude compassion. The anger and hurt that once defined my feelings toward them have mellowed into something more like pity for what they missed, for what they limited themselves to, for the genuine connections they sacrificed at the altar of appearances. My journey taught me that success isn't measured by wealth or recognition, though I'm grateful for the security and opportunities my financial success has provided. True success is finding purpose in your work authenticity, in your relationships, and peace within yourself. The mansion around me is beautiful, but its true value isn't in its architecture or furnishings. Its value lies in being a home created on my own terms, filled with people who see me for who I am, not what I own or what I've achieved. I hear footsteps behind me and turn to find Zoe, 2 dessert plates in hand. "You okay out here?" she asks, offering me one of the plates. "Just reflecting," I reply, accepting the tiramisu, my favorite. "On how far we've come, on what really matters." "And what's the verdict?" "What really matters?" she asks, leaning against the railing beside me. I look back through the windows at the people gathered in my home, laughing, talking, connecting authentically. "This," I say simply, "these people, this life we've built, being valued for who we are, not what we can do for someone else." We stand in companionable silence for a moment, enjoying our dessert and the peaceful night. "Ready to go back in?" Zoe finally asks. "Marcus is threatening to tell the story of our first investor pitch again." I laugh. "The one where you spilled coffee all over your presentation notes." "That's the one?" She grins, though he always exaggerates how badly I handled it. "Let's go save your reputation," I say, following her back inside to the warmth and genuine connection I once thought impossible to find. If you've ever felt excluded or undervalued by family, I hope my story reminds you that your worth isn't determined by others' opinions. Have you experienced conditional love or had to create boundaries with family members? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you, and subscribe to my channel for more real-life stories about finding your value and building the life you deserve. Share this with someone who might need to hear that they're enough exactly as they are. Thank you for being part of my journey. You're the reason I continue sharing these deeply personal experiences.